Why are young people today so uncertain about our futures? Now, aside from the obvious anxieties that a lot of us have about putting off milestones in our future, things like getting employed, getting married, buying your own home, or even retiring, there's another contributing factor to our uncertainty that I'm going to speak about with you today, and it is called death by 1,000 voices. Death by 1,000 voices refers to how we as young people are distracting ourselves from the problems in our lives, the problems that I just mentioned, by going online way too much and over-engaging in the dramas and advice provided by a myriad of streamers and influencers and culture makers. And in this video, I'm going to show you how Gen Z people, like you and me, are suffering this death by 1,000 voices. I'm going to show you how our uncertain future leads us to distract ourselves from it. I'm also going to show you how plugging into this range of streamers and influencers is destroying the Gen Z psyche, and how this runs a lot deeper than the typical arguments you'll hear about screen time and procrastination. We're going to go deeper in this video. We're going to look into the psychology of Gen Z people. It might not be an argument you'll have heard before. At the end of this video, I'm also going to show you what you could do as a young person to reclaim agency over your own life and over your own narrative, without running offline forever into a cabin in the woods and becoming something like a modern day Unabomber. So let's get straight into it. Why is this death by 1,000 voices such a huge problem for young people today? Well, like many of the issues that I discuss on this channel, I first began to notice this one in myself. I got to a point where I was over-consuming so much content that I began to think, how can anyone, let alone me, figure out what direction to take in their lives with all of this constant online noise? By constantly having to be up to date with the drama of any given streamer, by constantly seeking out more information, more context from political streamers, from online debates, and from online gurus. And the view that I want to present off the back of this is that this constant plugging in to the many influencers on social media leaves us young people with an alarming lack of ability to focus. And I don't mean focus in terms of our attention spans or on productivity or any of that. Rather, we cannot focus on the narrative behind our own lives and where this narrative is taking us. And a big reason for this is that Gen Z people are dealing with a mountain of problems at the moment. I've got a graph here that shows many of the ones that you might be dealing with today. And also, the outlook for Gen Z in the future isn't exactly rosy and bright either. So in a sense, what we are doing as young people is we are distracting ourselves, from the bleak reality that we have to face into in our real lives. Rather than reflecting on this and thinking about it, we are distracting ourselves from the narrative that we have in our heads about it, which is very, very uncomfortable to reflect on. So that's how it goes. When us Gen Z people go offline, our inner narrative clicks back on, and it reminds you, rent is due. And maybe you can't earn enough to afford your rent, or if you can, you can't earn enough to save enough at the end of every month to be able to afford your own home in the future. And if you can't afford your own home, who are you going to attract? Are you going to get married? Are you going to have kids? If you can't have kids, then when and if you retire, who's even going to be around to take care of you when you grow old? You can see that kind of inner narrative snowballs very quickly. It gets very bleak very fast. And maybe if you're in university, it starts a little bit earlier. If you're in university right now, like many Gen Z people are, you're saying, well, man, AI is going to take over my field. The job market is cooked anyway. And you can spiral from there. So the point is that the inner narrative for a lot of Gen Z people is very, very bleak. And of course, you would distract yourself from it if you're wanting to keep yourself sane in any way at all. So this begs the obvious question. Why would you even bother listening to your inner narrative at all if it's just going to depress you all the damn time? Well, Shakespeare explained this better than anyone else has, which is not surprising because he explained many things better than anyone else has. One of Shakespeare's famous quotes goes like this. He said, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their entrances and their exits, but one man in his time plays many different parts." Now, aside from the very obvious analogy that Shakespeare is making here, that life is like a play or it's like a drama, maybe for our time you could say life is like a video game, Shakespeare is saying that the best way to view the world and your place in it is through the story that you experience in your own life. Why is this? A story shows you the manner in which people actually exist. It captures the real and essentially human elements of our existence. And models of the world, which include things like consciousness, emotion, motivations, actions, interactions, the best model for these are typically stories. Think about it. This is why you love to watch films and TV series and dramas so much. This is why more people watch streamers like Kai Cenat, for example, rather than taking a deep, profound interest in science. Because science doesn't have any of the human emotion or drama behind it, whereas a streamer, even though you might think they're a bit stupid, at least there's some kind of drama going on, something that you, the human element inside you, can connect with. I know I explained that very robotically, like I'm not even human, but you get my point. Now, the importance of stories, and especially the one that we run in our day-to-day lives, is down to the fact that they have a deep underlying meaning that is often more potent and more striking than we actually consciously understand. They have a huge impact on us. Think for a moment about your favorite film or TV series of all time. Why do you actually like this? For most people, it will be because the first time they ever watched this particular piece of drama, they were struck with a deep chord of remembering. There was something in that film or TV show that was like striking a light switch in your mind. It reminded you that, oh yes, this is actually the point of living. Now we can see why great stories are so potent for us if you look at philosophy as well. Of course, it was Plato who first said that all knowledge is remembering. Now today we know that that's not strictly speaking true. You can go out into the world, have experiences and learn from them as well. But Plato's idea, in my opinion, was really brought to life by Carl Jung, who suggested that in our dreams, there are symbols and pictures and images that are there before we ever encounter them in our real day-to-day lives. Think, for example, about a child who has a dream about a snake. The snake might not represent a literal snake that the child actually saw, but something like evil or lying or danger, for example. Now, again, Jung is suggesting that that image of the snake is pre-baked inside in our minds before we ever see a snake in our real lives. And this is why the great stories connect with us so deeply. Great fiction, what it does, so your favorite film, your favorite TV show, is it works out and it presents the deeper laws behind our individual lives. It shows us the complex and often irrational patterns that cannot be explained by science, by self-improvement gurus. They can never tell you something like this. Following on from this, the reason that Death by a Thousand Voices is so bad is because it makes us unable to focus on our own inner story and the direction that it's going. Our constant going online and listening to gurus and following the lives of streamers, if this is done too often, and because Gen Z are terminally online freaks, it is done too often, then by default what you're doing if you do this is you're placing the importance of the life of the streamer and the opinions of the influencer above your own. And this has a number of deep psychological consequences. Now, the first problem with this is that it makes you an incredibly low agency person. If you're constantly downloading your ideas from the internet, then you're not operating from your own worldview at all. You're operating based on unearned wisdom from another bloke in another country who lives in a completely different context to you. Andrew Tate's a fantastic example of this. Whatever you think about him, he is an incredibly high agency person. He operates from his own worldview to a fault. What happened with him was a lot of young guys started to follow him. They started to try and mirror his worldview in their own lives. Of course, it doesn't work because you're not in the same context as Andrew Tate. You almost certainly have a different moral system and moral code to him. Death by a Thousand Voices is also a big reason why so many Gen Z people suffer with analysis paralysis, why we are so indecisive. Of course, if you're constantly monitoring the internet to see which worldview is the best, how can you ever settle on one? You think about people who are very, very into online politics. These are people who, each time a new political scandal drops, they have to go online and monitor the situation to see which take is the best one to have on the current thing that is happening. You could also think about this in a guru and influencer context, right? One day you're a young Gen Z guy, you're following online self-improvement. But then all of a sudden the red pill gets popular. You start to follow this and download all the opinions from this part of the internet. Then the black pill becomes popular. You shift from red pill to black pill. And now all of a sudden you are looks maxing. At what point on this ideological journey do you come to your senses and say, hang on a minute, I'm not actually developing my own opinion here, I'm just hopping from one popular trend to the next. And if you're constantly looking to get your worldview from the internet and you're constantly changing your position, how are you supposed to operate confidently with real authority behind your opinions in the real world? This is what's causing a lot of the analysis paralysis for Gen Z. Now, built onto that problem, you also have the inability to develop your own story, your own worldview in the context in which you live. This happened to me when I lived about 2 years ago in Spain. When I moved to Spain, I was on this big self-improvement, self-development arc. And what this caused me to do while I lived in Spain was to really isolate myself from a lot of interesting people and opportunities, because I was so focused on trying to lock in and build up my body, but even more powerfully than that, try to hustle and grind and build a business. That made me very, very unhappy in that particular context. And I think that's an example of what happens when this kind of online dogma that you download from the internet smashes up against reality. Now, don't get me wrong either, self-improvement can be a good thing, and I certainly encourage people, if they're interested in it, to build up their own businesses. Again, only if you're interested. But there are certain points in your life, in your own particular context, where that is going to work an awful lot better than others. There is also the inability to develop your inner story, your inner narrative, due to distraction. A big trend that comes around every autumn going into winter for Gen Z guys is that we will go on places like TikTok, Instagram Reels, maybe YouTube Shorts, and we'll get blasted with these hype edits of young guys in the gym putting on their black hoodie and going on a villain arc. Now, the purpose of this content is to try and pump up Gen Z guys to say, no, it's your time. You have to lock in, you have to build up your body, you have to go on self-improvement, you have to build up your finances and all of this stuff. And what usually happens with this is that Gen Z guys, they get inspired for about a month, and then what happens to you is you forget about the villain arc. You fall off your self-improvement after a while, because the villain arc itself doesn't actually mean anything to you. Nothing has actually happened in your personal life to catalyze you into doing any of this stuff. Now, what happens to a lot of guys who go on the villain arc, and look, I'm sympathetic to this, I've done the whole self-improvement era as well, is that you will begin to experience this low-grade anxiety that a lot of Gen Z people feel, that I discussed at the beginning of this video. And to distract yourself from that, you'll go on TikTok, on Instagram Reels, on YouTube Shorts, and you'll get blasted by all the villain arc edits. And rather than going offline and reflecting on that kind of low-grade anxious feeling that permeates your life, you will say, no, I just need to lock in. I just need to go on self-improvement. I need to build myself up in the gym. I need to get hench. I need to build my finances. And you'll just accept that as fact rather than actually reflecting on, okay, where is this low-grade anxiety coming from and what should I do about it in the context of my own life? Again, you forget about the villain arc because it doesn't actually mean anything to you. If you'd gone out and tried to solve your problems in the real world and embrace difficulties that way, that's a much better catalyst. Now, what I think the biggest issue Gen Z people would face from Death by a Thousand Voices is identity splitting, where we actually forget who we even are. It's like, are you your own individuated person with your own opinions and your own worldview that you developed? Or are you simply a follower of an influencer and you hold mostly the same beliefs as they do? And the reason that this identity splitting is such a big problem is because it can happen to any Gen Z person, and it can happen to them pretty quickly and pretty unconsciously. Now, this video here I thought was a fantastic case study of this phenomenon, and I'll link it below if I can remember. But it shows that one of the big streamers, Sneeko, now to me at least, it seems that Sneeko is a streamer who is famous for being a streamer who appears in other streamers' streams. I don't actually know really what Sneeko does. He appears, at least to me, to make these kind of artistic films and that kind of stuff. But to me, he seems to be somebody who is famous for being around other famous streamers. And the whole point of this video was showing that Sneeko is a Gen Z guy, right? He's the same age as me. He's 26 or maybe 27. I think he's a little bit older, but he got his opinions on women from Andrew Tate. He decided to lock in and hustle because he met Iman Gadzhi, and he takes a lot of his political opinions, for example, from somebody like Nick Fuentes. And Sneako's opinions basically change like the wind. They change with whoever he is around at any particular moment. And I think that's fascinating because that happens to a lot of us in Gen Z as well, and we're not even really aware of it happening. Now again, I don't wish kind of any ill will towards Sneako, but the point of that particular video was to show that we don't really actually know what Sneako's real opinions are, and neither does he. And if you're a Gen Z person who feels, again, like you're undergoing this kind of identity splitting, then neither do you. Now, I'm not saying you can never go online to seek out advice either. I think the internet can be a very good place to get information quickly that you might not have access to in your real life. But the issue for me with following dating gurus, business gurus, even psychological gurus, is in the first principle. I think it's better, let's say you're interested in business, for example, to first decide to start a business, or at least first have an interest in it, to try that, to get started, get your bloody nose, make your mistakes, and then seek out advice on how to improve and iterate from there. I think this is normally better, provided you don't get lost in kind of analysis paralysis and over-consuming business content. However, if you're a young person and you don't really know what direction you're going in your life, and you feel that kind of low-grade anxiousness that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, and then you find some guru who advises you to start a business, they say, 2026 is your last year to start a social media marketing agency. If you don't do this, you'll be tracked forever. And if you go along with that person, then good luck and the best to you. I think it's very, very important for us as Gen Z people to note influencers who sell to us based on our own personal pain and the things that we lack, versus influencers who sell to us based on things that we are actually interested in. Now, as for streamers, I don't follow any myself, but I think for Gen Z people, these streamers, look, they might be entertaining in some cases. And I'm certainly not against entertainment. I'm not saying you need to go away into your room and just be a robot and just be productive all the time. However, I do think in the majority of cases, because Gen Z are going through something of a loneliness crisis, I think streamers offer something of a parasocial relationship in the absence of having real friendships in the real world. And if you think about the average Gen Z person, right, maybe in school or university, they're studying in their room, or maybe if they're at work, they're working from home. Rather than sitting there and sitting with this kind of uncomfortable silence, you have a streamer on in the background. You have some kind of background noise that distracts yourself from yourself. Again, I think this might be illustrative of us as young people simply avoiding silence or boredom, because silence and boredom naturally bring with them these kind of uncomfortable thoughts about, oh man, the future is looking bleak. I have all of these problems that I need to deal with. That comes with silence and boredom. You can only really work through those in silence as well. And so in general, I think the priority should be, for us as young people, not to invest in the narratives and dramas of streamers and online gurus to the detriment of our own. And I'm now going to get into why I think that is so important. So why should we focus on our own narrative? Why should we lean into that kind of uncomfortable voice in our own head? Well, as I said, this death by 1,000 voices is leaving us as young people with analysis paralysis. Our heads are full of ideas, but we lack the inner confidence to take action on any of them because there's so many of them floating around in our minds. In this way, Gen Z people are like architects. We are always sketching ideas, we're always optimizing the house, but we never become the construction worker who puts the first brick in the ground, who takes action on the architect's ideas. A good example of this is that many Gen Z guys are online looking for advice on how to deal with women and how to attract women. But they look for this advice often before they've ever actually tried asking one out in the real world. And look, that's very, very strange. It comes back to what I said in my previous video. Gen Z have something of a security consciousness because we think like computers. And in this way, in this example, Young guys are scared to go out there. They're scared to take risks, to be seen to mess up when they speak to women. And so they need to have all of the ideas about women, again, which they downloaded from the internet, in place before they ever allow themselves to get out there and actually try and do something, to try and attract someone. So once you let go of analysis paralysis, once you take a step back from the many ideas that are presented to you online, then you'll find yourself stuck on your own 2 feet. You'll have to solve your own problems. You have to develop your own capacity for creative thinking so that you can develop your own solutions to your own particular problems in the context of your own life. Now, this is absolutely doable, and I know this from experience. If I can do it, then so can you. And when you manage to generate your own solutions to the problems that you face in your life, this gives you more agency and more confidence. You now have a worldview to stand behind. You have an opinion to stand behind at this point. Even if you think about what Shakespeare said, right? He said all the men and women are merely players. Now, players in Shakespeare's language, what this means is actors. But if we upgrade this to, or maybe downgrade is a better way to say this, if we downgrade this into Gen Z language, again, he's saying that your life is like a video game. Don't roll your eyes. That's what he's saying. And he's saying that you're the main character in this video game. So again, I don't want you to think that this is a cringe example, right? He is saying you have agency. You will encounter different states in your life that you need to deal with. And if you can think about your life in this way, that is the way that's going to give you the most agency to succeed in whatever way you picture that success. Now, if you think as well, right, about a lot of content that goes towards young people, what does this do? It reminds them of how little agency they have, right? And even Gen Z content, the type of content that I make, does this all the time. Now, this is not my intention, but this content always reminds Gen Z people that the economic system's against you. You have very little agency. There's little you can do to change this. Your future, you are screwed. You can't even do anything to change this politically because boomers will outvote you. And what this constantly reminds young people of is that there's no point of ever even picking up the controller, of even trying. And look, that's not the message that I have for young people here. What I'm saying to you is that if you do dare to pick up the controller, right, and stop living this life that many Gen Z people do, where they're watching online streamers play the game of life, right? You think about it, you're like a child who's watching his older brother play a game, and you desperately want to play, you want to get in there, but he doesn't let you. That's what you're like if you're constantly watching streamers. You're watching them go through their lives, over focusing on picking up your own controller and playing your own. And I think that is the way that gives us as Gen Z people the best chance to succeed. Because once you pick up the controller, you become aware of the game that you're in, and you realize what you need to do in order to succeed in your own life. Again, if you can develop this capacity for creative thinking by engaging with the world around you, then you start to discover that your own way, your new way of thinking, is pretty strong as well. Then you can go from strength to strength. Now, if you can do that, you can get out into your own real life and you can start to smash up against it, make your mistakes and learn from them, develop your own worldview as a consequence of this. Then you're less likely to fall into ideological traps that don't help you and don't apply to your life, right? So I spoke about many of these in a lot of my past videos. I spoke about, this traditional ideology, red pill ideology, black pill ideology, becoming a doomer, following pop philosophy, following online spirituality as like a kind of a dogma, following woke ideology is another one, right? So you can follow all of these, you can download all of them from the internet, but they're not going to apply to you 100%. You might not even necessarily believe in all of them. And to constantly latch on to these external ideas is to be weak-spirited and lack conviction in your own beliefs and your own capacity to problem solve. So once you develop that, you're less prone to fall down into online rabbit holes. Now, if you decide to go down this path, if you decide to cultivate your inner narrative, you decide to find out, okay, well, what opinions do I hold? What do I actually want out of my life? What direction do I want to travel in? The big thing to avoid is to avoid navel-gazing or getting hung up on your past. Going into your past, looking at your memories and trying to seek out multiple traumas that you suffer or are a victim of. The point of this is not to become a victim of your own story, rather to figure out the best way to move it along. Only you have access to the full slideshow of your memories, and your inner narrative is something that belongs uniquely to you. So it goes that figuring out what direction to take this narrative in is a power that only you can draw from. Depending on the frame that you have on your own inner narrative, it can be a massive advantage that only you have access to. So that is our death by 1,000 voices problem. We are constantly distracted from figuring out which direction we want to take our own lives as Gen Z people. And often the content we consume discourages us from ever actually trying to do that in the first place. And so now, we come to the point of the video where I'm going to ask, what do you think about all of this? What do you think about this death by 1,000 voices problem? Do you think it's a big problem that a lot of us young people face, or maybe you are going through it at the moment? Or maybe you think I've simply gone insane and that this isn't relevant in any way, shape or form to young people today whatsoever. If any of these are the case, then please do be sure to let me know down in the comments below. I do read all of the comments. Of course, I am a channel that focuses on Gen Z people, so I can only learn about what we are all going through by reading what you have to say, reading what your opinions are on these particular topics. And of course, it goes without saying that if you did like this video, then be sure to help me out. I'm only a small channel for now, but every like, every share, every comment really goes a long way to helping me out, and I would absolutely appreciate if you would leave something like that on this video. So if you stick around and you do all of that good stuff, then I will be sure in the next video to tell you exactly what you should believe and how you should think. You have not joined a cult.